Story 1. Something Outside the Cabin. Growing up in a quiet, rural part of Virginia, I learned early to love the wide, open spaces and the deep, enveloping forests that surrounded our modest farm. The town we lived in was a mere blip on the map, distinguished only by a few streetlights that served as a beacon for those who passed through. My childhood was filled with adventures in those woods, camping, hunting, fishing, a life that taught me not just to respect nature, but to thrive within it. Later in life, after 4.5 years with the Marines, honing my survival skills to a razor's edge, I returned home. My brother, 2 close friends from the service, and I celebrated my return by hiking the Appalachian Trail. It took us 5 months, but those days, trekking through the wilderness, solidified my belief in my capabilities and my comfort in the great outdoors. In the early 90s, I moved to a small town in Connecticut, taking up a job that had me working as an armed guard for a government agency. There I met Todd, a kindred spirit who shared my love for the wilderness and astronomy. Our friendship was immediate and deep, forged in shared interests and mutual respect. In 1992, Todd's grandfather passed, leaving him a cabin in New Hampshire. The cabin, a sturdy stone and log structure, was built in the 1920s. It was an inheritance that brought Todd immense pride and excitement. He invited me, along with another friend and our girlfriends, to visit this retreat. Despite its need for repair, the promise of isolation and wilderness was irresistible. Eventually, we visited in the fall, after Todd had made the necessary repairs. With a new roof, a secure metal door, and a wood stove, it was a haven in the wild. The surrounding land, with its trout-filled pond and the vibrant fall colors, was mesmerizing. Under the clear night skies, we planned our next adventure, a winter trip, just the guys, promising ourselves the rugged solitude of the cold season. So, in February 1993, equipped for a harsh winter stay, we made our way back. The cabin, hours from the nearest sign of civilization, was exactly as we left it. We made the most of our stay, filling it with the simple joys of outdoor life, target shooting, ice fishing, and the camaraderie that comes with shared adventure. In an instant, though, everything would change. The events that took place the last night were so terrifying and left us so shaken that we would never return to the cabin again. It was around 3 a.m. when I was first awoken, the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, moving outside. My initial instinct was to protect, a holdover from my Marine days, I guess. But as the night progressed, survival would trump all else. As the noises continued, the others woke, and we listened, hearts racing, as the steps persisted, accompanied by a foul stench that seeped through the walls. This smell wasn't just bad, it was the kind of odor that filled your mouth and coated your throat, a putrid mix of decay and something unnaturally vile. Whatever this was, it very soon became clear that it wasn't human, and that our best bet was to stay inside and keep as quiet as possible. As the night wore on, the steps grew louder, more deliberate, as if whatever was out there was taking its time, savoring the fear it knew it was instilling in us. The tension and fear were overwhelming, almost unbearable. It was pitch black outside, and we had no idea what we were dealing with. We couldn't see anything, but we could hear everything. Suddenly, everything stopped, and it was completely quiet. The momentary pause felt like an eternity. We hadn't heard it leave, so we knew it wasn't gone. At the same time, because we couldn't hear or see it, we didn't know what it was doing. The thought of the unknown was a terror that I don't think that I'll ever be able to describe. Suddenly, just as we were trying to contemplate what we should do, a scream shattered the night. A sound so primal, so filled with anguish and rage, that it felt as if the very air around us vibrated. It wasn't human, nor animal. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. The cabin shook as whatever it was began to pound on the walls, each thud a blow to our sanity. The metal door, our only barrier to the outside, rattled under the force of its assault. We could hear piercing scratching, nails or claws, we couldn't be sure, dragging across the surface, seeking entry. The door handle twisted violently, a clear intent to enter, to find us. In that moment, we were prey. We readied our weapons, not with the confidence of seasoned outdoorsmen, but with the desperation of men facing the unknown. But as dawn began to finally break, the pounding suddenly ceased. It was then that we began to hear steps again, menacing and heavy, but this time they were heading away, off into the woods. Whatever it was didn't seem to care for the daylight, and finally began to make its way out. It was then that I crept over to a window and slowly pulled back a curtain. And it was then that I finally caught sight of it. A figure, too grotesque to be human, with pale skin as white as the snow that blanketed the ground. Its form was tall, its limbs unnaturally long, and it walked upright just like a man, although it certainly wasn't one. Perhaps most terrifying of all, atop its head were what appeared to be horns. But these weren't the antlers of any creature I knew. They twisted upwards, silhouetted against the breaking day. Its eyes, if it had them, were hidden in the shadow of its brow, leaving only the impression of a gaze that could pierce through the wooden walls and into our very souls. I watched as it walked away slowly and finally disappeared into the forest. As soon as we felt like we were in the clear, we fled, abandoning our belongings, driven only by the need to escape. The door bore the marks of the night's terror, deep gouges that spoke of a strength and ferocity beyond our comprehension. The ground outside was marred by its tracks. They were long, narrow, and had elongated toes. These weren't the footprints of any known animal. They were something else, something beyond the boundaries of our understanding. Since that day, I've left the wilderness behind. The experience shook me to my core, turning my love for the outdoors into a wary respect. I still venture out occasionally, but always armed, always watchful, and always during the day. What we encountered that night, I can't say for certain. Some have suggested a wendigo, a creature of legend, but I've stopped searching for answers. I've only shared this story with a few, a tale of a night when the wilds of New Hampshire revealed a darkness I never knew existed. Story 2. I disturbed their hunt. Let me tell you about something that happened to me back in 2002. I was living in northwest Wyoming, a place where the mountains meet the sky in a way that can make you believe in just about anything. I was 26 then, working at a small bar in town. There, everyone knew your name, and if they didn't, they soon would. One of the locals, Mandy, lived up the road towards the park. She owned a ranch there and was in a bit of a bind. Her husband had passed away earlier that year, and the guy who was helping her around the place up and quit without so much as a word. So she offered me a deal: earn a little bit of money and live in the guest house for free in exchange for doing some chores around the property. Sounded like a dream to me at the time. Free rent, and all I had to do was water some trees and look after the pets when Mandy was away. I'd been working at the ranch for about 2 weeks when I decided to take a hike towards the Shoshone National Forest. It's a vast wilderness, thick with lodgepole pine, and it can get pretty dark and eerie in there. But that day, I was just looking to explore a bit, get to know the land I was living on. As I was going about my hike, I found something quite peculiar. I found a long, narrow valley, with odd, dome-shaped structures scattered about. They were made of tree branches, moss, mud, and pine boughs, big enough for a few people to stand up inside. My first thought was that maybe some Boy Scouts or ranch hands had made them, but something about the whole scene felt off. There was something odd about them, something that felt unnatural. There was a deafening silence around the place, too. It was heavy and pressed down on me like a warning, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there. As I turned to leave, a chill ran down my spine. It felt like I was being watched by unseen eyes. The feeling was so intense that it raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I started back towards the forest, trying to shake the unease that clung to me like a second skin. As I hurried away from the eerie domes, the forest's stillness was suddenly shattered by a sound that stopped me in my tracks. Turning, I was confronted by the sight of a massive bull elk, its once majestic form now a picture of agony. Its eyes were wild with pain as it lurched from the tree line into the clearing. A dark stain spread across its muscular neck, a stark contrast to the tawny fur. Its back, though, it was a grotesque sight. Something I never expected and something I thought I'd never see in my life. The skin had been torn away in a swath that revealed the raw, red muscle beneath, glistening wetly in the fading light. Strips of flesh hung limply, swaying with each pained step the elk took. The animal's labored breathing was the only sound in a world that had gone silent with shock. The elk had been attacked, it was being hunted, and I had just disturbed the hunt. My mind screamed for me to flee, to escape the scene of primal brutality before me, but my feet were rooted to the ground by fear. I could see movement behind the elk. At first, I believed it to be two bears, but as I watched their hulking shapes and the way that they moved, it became clear pretty quickly that they were, in fact, not bears. These animals were an aberration, something torn from the realm of nightmares and fleshed into being. Their gait was unnatural, arms too long, hanging down and ending in hands that touched the ground. They were covered in what looked like thick, coarse hair that blended with the shadows in the forest. They moved with deliberate slowness, heavy hands and feet making soft thuds on the pine needle-strewn ground. Their heads were low, tracking the elk's progress with an unsettling patience, exuding a palpable sense of menace. As they stepped clear into the waning light, I saw their eyes, intelligent and focused, locked not onto the elk, but ominously, directly on me. I stood there, rooted to the spot in terror, as one of the creatures stood up, revealing its full height. It had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders that blocked out the waning light. I felt its gaze on me, weighing me, deciding what I was to it, enemy or prey. The moment stretched, a standoff between man and beast, until I realized I needed to get out of there. I backed away slowly, not daring to turn my back on them. When I finally felt I could make a break for it, I ran like hell back to the ranch, and the sounds of a screaming elk could be heard in the distance behind me. The next day, I told Mandy I couldn't stay there anymore. I didn't go into detail. I just mentioned that I heard unsettling animal sounds in the night that I couldn't place. She understood, said she'd heard them too, and agreed to let me work for her only during the day. Years later, I can't shake the memory of that day, the sight of those creatures, and the haunting realization that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. At the time, I didn't know what I was looking at. To me, they were monsters. But to many who have seen them, they go by a different name: Sasquatches. Story 3. We were trapped. It was back in the mid-'80s, when my life took a turn I never expected. I was just a kid back then, growing up in a place right outside Memphis, Tennessee. The area was a slice of heaven for a boy like me. Surrounded by nature, it was all about fishing in the creek, finding rocks, and exploring the woods that bordered our home. That year, the obsession that took hold of me and my friends was nothing short of a childhood dream turned reality. We were on a mission, a quest to carve out our very own hideout from the side of a cliff that bordered the wooded expanse near our homes. Armed with nothing more than shovels, picks, and the boundless energy of youth, we dedicated every spare moment we had to this endeavor. Under the canopy of trees, with the beauty of nature as our backdrop, we dug, scraped, and excavated. Our imaginations ran wild with visions of being rugged explorers or mountain men from tales of old, laying claim to a piece of untamed wilderness. The project became more than a pastime. It was a labor of love, a testament to our camaraderie and shared adventure. But as the days turned into nights, and our progress became marked by the growing pile of earth beside the cliff, none of us could have anticipated the shift that was about to occur, a night that would alter the course of our innocent fun forever. It was during one of those cool evenings, with the crackle of our campfire casting flickering shadows against the rough-hewn entrance of our nascent cave, that the air around us changed. Me and John, sitting across from each other by the fire, were in the midst of a light-hearted debate when a sudden disturbance shattered the peace. A rock, the size of a bowling ball, and seemingly guided by an unseen force, hurtled down from the darkness above. It landed with a menacing thud right at the cave's entrance, its arrival accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from all around us. The sound was primal, a harbinger of something ancient and malevolent lurking just beyond the veil of night. We exchanged a look of mutual alarm, and as our eyes adjusted to the dim light, we peered across the ditch that separated us from the dense thicket of trees. There, illuminated by the firelight, a figure emerged from the shadows, a presence so imposing and otherworldly that it rooted us to the spot. The creature that stood before us was a nightmare incarnate, a being so grotesque and yet mesmerizing that it defied all logic. Towering at least 7.5 to 8 feet tall, it bore the unmistakable silhouette of a canine, yet stood erect with an air of dominance and intelligence that no wild animal possessed. The firelight danced across its features, revealing a mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth, each one glinting like a blade in the night. Its smile, if one could call it that, was twisted into a grotesque grin, a silent challenge, or perhaps a mockery of our terror. The creature's eyes, a haunting shade of amber, seemed to glow with a malevolent light, fixing us with a stare that promised untold horrors. Its fur, a patchwork of black and gray, bristled with every movement, muscles rippling beneath the surface like coiled steel. But it was the arms that truly horrified us, disproportionately long and ending in hands equipped with claws black as night, sharp as daggers, and gleaming with a malevolent intent. In that moment, as we sat frozen by the campfire, we understood that we were not alone in our childhood sanctuary. We were in the presence of a predator, a creature of legend and nightmare, stalking the edges of our reality. As soon as we acknowledged its presence, it ducked out of sight, as if it vanished into thin air. It continued to lurk, though, filling the air with a sinister presence that persisted. That night, as we huddled in fear inside our makeshift cave, we could hear it moving around outside, growling in a way that left us shaking in our boots. We were trapped, too terrified to leave until the sun came up. The dogman, as some have called it, stalked us from the shadows, never letting us out of its sight. As the first light of dawn began to break through the darkness, casting a pale, early morning glow over the woods that had been the stage for our night of terror, the oppressive presence that had kept us paralyzed with fear throughout the night finally began to recede. The menacing growls and the heavy, ominous silence that had enveloped our makeshift cave were gradually replaced by the familiar sounds of birds chirping and the gentle rustling of leaves in the morning breeze. It was as if the forest itself was awakening from a nightmare, shaking off the remnants of darkness that had descended upon it. With the creature's departure, a palpable sense of relief washed over us. We had survived the night, a night that had stretched on with the weight of an eternity, each moment laden with the fear of what lurked just beyond the fragile barrier of our cave's entrance. The daylight, with its promise of safety and the return to normalcy, emboldened us. We exchanged weary, yet relieved glances, acknowledging without words that our ordeal was over, at least for now. Gathering what little courage we had left, we cautiously emerged from our haven, the cave that had been our project of adventure, but had turned into our sanctuary against the night's horrors. The world outside seemed different in the light of day, less menacing, yet forever altered in our eyes. With hurried steps, we made our way back to the safety of our homes, the events of the night hanging heavily over us like a shadow that refused to dissipate with the rising sun. Our escape from the clutches of whatever had hunted us felt like a rebirth, a second chance granted by the mere fact of our survival. Looking back, I've come to believe that what we encountered wasn't just some animal. It was something more. It didn't attack us, not physically, but it left its mark on us all the same. It taught me that the world is far more mysterious and terrifying than I could have ever imagined. Now, years later, I find myself drawn back to that place, to those woods and that unfinished cave. There's a part of me that needs to understand, to confront whatever it was that we faced all those years ago. But another part of me knows that some mysteries are best left unsolved, that some fears are too deep to ever truly overcome.